If you didn't catch before, my name is Dominguez. I'm the founder of Delta Emerald Ventures, and I'm the host of CannaDataCon. So the title here, Data Wrangling 101, Building a Data Forward Organization, it's meant to really call to light what this industry, a lot of this business is about, which is data wrangling. I'll explain a little bit about that, but before I do that, I would like to tell y'all a story. So there's this ancient Indian parable from like 500 BC. It's called The Blind Man and the Elephant. The way the story goes, there's 4 or 5 blind men. They're brought up to an elephant, have never seen an elephant before in their life. Obviously, they can't see, but they've never even encountered an elephant before. So they are walked up to the elephant, and each of them is placed at a different part of the elephant. So you have one blind man at the tusk, another one at the trunk, another one at the tail, the leg, and the stomach. And each of them is invited to feel their part of the elephant. And from that, they're using their senses, and they draw a determination on what they're actually dealing with. So the guy at the trunk, he says, well, obviously this is a snake. Couldn't not be a snake. It's clearly a snake. The guy at the stomach is like, this is really solid. This feels like a wall. Obviously, we're talking about a wall here. The person at the tusk, this is a spear. What are you guys talking about? Obviously, this is a spear we're dealing with. And on, you go to the tail. Oh, it's a rope, because that's all I have. All I can see here is that this is clear. All I can feel here is this long rope-like thing. This must be a rope. And so they go and argue about what they're actually interacting with. And depending on which version of this story you hear, they actually eventually come to blows, the blind men. And in some versions of the story, they kill each other. And there's a lot, in my opinion, to take from this story. But the moral of this story, in my mind, is that each person's truth is a product of the information that you have. And you are only going to see something through whatever senses that you have to give you that, to give you that view of what you're actually looking at. And I hope you can understand where I'm going with this in the cannabis industry. And to be clear, me speaking on behalf of Delta Emerald, we are no different from anyone else in this industry in that we all have imperfect information. And we're trying to do the best that we can with the information that we have in front of us. But we just have to remember that the story of the blind man and the elephant and the cautionary tale that leads to, which is that you can accept that you have whatever information that you have at your hands, maybe acknowledge and understand that other people are dealing with different information. Everyone's trying to do their best, but that's just what you have to deal with. So I think for us at Delta Emerald, we understand this. We can accept when we lack information, but that's also what gives us drive to go and find it. So that's the blind man and the elephant. Now, data wrangling. For those of you who are Gen Z and whatnot, you might not get this reference. This is from a movie called Zoolander. And if I have to explain it, I guess I will. 2 models are told over the phone that the files are in the computer, and hilarity ensues. They're jumping on top of the computer. They're trying to smash it. They're trying to get the files out of the computer. They don't know how to do it. I think the point here is data wrangling, as I'm going to explain to you, is hard. At the same time, though, data wrangling is the most important part of this journey. You probably hear a lot these days about AI and computer learning or machine learning, all these kind of buzzwords. I'm here to tell you that 99% of the time, they are just buzzwords. There is a place for it, but for those of you who are familiar with the concept garbage in, garbage out, if you have bad data to start with, you're just throwing an army of expensive computers at something, and they're just going to spit out gobbledygook. And so I think there's a lot of over-reliance on these terms about machine learning and AI as if that's going to save the world. And from a data perspective, it's not. First, you have to actually have reliable sources of information. You need to understand with every source of information, it has strengths and weaknesses. And so I think a really important part about this is understanding that all those nice to haves are nice to have. The here and now is just collecting the information, recognizing its strengths and weaknesses, and then making assessment as to what to do with that information. So I always really liked this meme, or whatever you want to call it, that I think does a pretty good job of explaining the differences between just starting with data itself and kind of moving beyond that. And I would invite all of you and those of you at home to ask, honestly, where is the cannabis industry today on this chart? In some ways, we are at data. In some, we might be at information. I would argue we're barely touching on knowledge. How certain parts of this industry link together, that is actually where most companies, doesn't matter if you're a multi-billion-dollar MSO or you're a single store mom and pop, you have the same problem fundamentally, which is that you have different parts of your business. They don't speak the same language. It would be like me saying, hey, it's 85 degrees here in Miami, and I'm talking to someone else on the other end of the phone, and it's 20 kittens in Philadelphia. That doesn't make any sense. There's no way to, and we are kind of at that stage right now in the cannabis industry where I think a lot of companies recognize that the files are in the computer, the value is in there, but how do I actually get it out? What do I actually do with it once I figure out how to liberate it? And yeah, how do I make my business better from that? So I would argue the cannabis industry is on the very far left of this slide, and our job is to try to move to the right. So I want to speak about what makes me excited, like understanding that there's a lot ahead of us in terms of wrangling this data together. There's a lot at stake and a lot to fight for to make this happen. And actually, I want to take a moment to thank, there's someone very special in the audience today, Jennifer Pollock, who was my first portfolio manager and drilled into me the value of data in making informed investment decisions. But the reality is, it's not just investing where this applies. Any business owner or operator needs to have information so you're not a blind man in this type of, in any business. So the other thing that Jen taught me was to always think from the perspective of the consumer. The good news about the cannabis industry is that there is absolutely zero controversy as to whether or not there's demand for cannabis. Zero. I can show you in many different ways, shapes and forms. The demand side is not the problem. And this slide actually shows a little bit about that from some of the data that we have, which Tristan, who's here today with you, for those of you in person, actually led this charge. But we actually looked at cannabis consumers, the same ones over time. And we said, let's track the behavior of this consumer and see what happens. Oftentimes, I tell a story about my mom. And the first time she went to a cannabis dispensary, it was in Colorado. she ended up with a basket of goods that, frankly, the dispensary operator, the bud tender, convinced her to buy, even if that wasn't the right thing for her. And I think you have to think about this industry not from the big $26 billion, $40 billion. No, screw that. It's not about that. It's about how does the individual consumer evolve over time? And then you can think about rolling that up to an entire kind of class of cannabis consumers and what that might look like over time. So what I can tell you based on the data that we have is that the average cannabis consumer, especially the returning cannabis consumer, it is orders of magnitude more valuable than some of the other subscription-like services that you might be familiar with. And I think we all know how much value is attributed towards the Netflixes, Amazons, take your pick. That part of the reason why people ascribe value to those companies is because there's this behavior, consistent behavior of usage of those platforms. And I'm here to tell you that the cannabis consumer is actually more valuable than those properties, and I can explain why. I think anyone could call out and say, Ian, this doesn't make any sense because I have a Spotify account, I've got an Amazon Prime account, and I just set it up once, I put my credit card in, and I never thought about it again. I get a bill every month, and I enjoy the services, and it's kind of set it and forget it. To which I would say, you're absolutely right. That's absolutely correct. There's a huge difference between the cannabis consumer and someone who's a Netflix subscriber. But it's actually a better dynamic because a cannabis consumer is actually transacting more often on a monthly basis, spending more money, and the majority of the time, and especially for the most loyal cannabis consumers, they're going in the store every single time. So you think about how much behavior has to drive, how much desire has to drive that type of behavior to transact multiple times a month, where you have to literally drive or walk into the store to do that. You probably don't even go to the grocery store that often. So this behavior is there. It's super valuable. And our job is to understand it better and figure out how to get the consumers what they want and how to empower the operators who have these customers. Another thing to point out here is the obvious difference between a new cannabis consumer and a returning cannabis consumer. So my mom would be in the new cannabis consumer. And we see over a multi-year period that a cannabis consumer that becomes more seasoned, we refer to this as the cannabis subscriber, which you'll hear about is it today or tomorrow? Tomorrow. You'll hear about the cannabis subscriber tomorrow a little bit more, but the TLDR there is that once you show signs of not just being a, let's say, cannabis tourist, you become a lot more valuable to cannabis companies. And I think something else that's happening in this industry right now is something I also want to address, which is this industry is getting more competitive every day. That shouldn't be a surprise. And I laugh or chuckle when I see photos or news reports about lines around the door at this new state just opened up. And here's one dispensary in the whole of New York City that has lines around the corner. I'm here to tell you that that's not normal. That's actually an aberration. And we are fooling ourselves if we think that it's going to be like that all the time. Instead, you have to accept that new dispensaries are going to come online. There are 1,500 active brands in California. Let's understand what that really means. There are, on average, 450 units of shelf space in a California dispensary, and there are 1,500 brands. How does that work? I don't know. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that we're in a moment of time right now, and I think the sooner that we accept that competition is coming, the sooner we can look to empower ourselves with tools that can make you a better operator than the person down the street. This also gets to another, I guess, philosophy that I have about this, which is you're either really good at building tools, if you think about a carpenter, or you're really good at using tools better than other people. And in the cannabis industry today, up to this point, there has been a lot of attempts at doing everything yourself. And I'm also here to tell you that I would caution against that type of behavior. There's not enough capital in this industry today to try to do everything yourself. You're much better off accepting what you're strong at and what you're weak at and looking to see who else can help you. And when it comes to turning a new cannabis consumer into a returning cannabis consumer, that's something that people can help you with. If you're a dispensary operator and someone just opened up right next to you, you have to accept that whatever loyal customer base you have is going to be siphoned off. There's no way you're going to stop it. So what you can do, though, is try to use better tools than your competitors. But first you have to accept that there's a problem. And the sooner you do that, the likely you are to succeed. And that's it. Any questions?
Is that spend at a single retailer or just spending on cannabis by the consumer?
So the question is on this chart, is this spend on a single retailer basis or on a single consumer basis?
I assume it's consumer.
It is on a single consumer basis. So a consumer could have transacted in multiple stores. We are able to see that activity across different stores, and that's how we're able to tell you that maybe the loyalty to any one store is lower, but the loyalty to the category is unquestioned.
Where do you see the impact of delivery on some of the importance of the
Great question. Great. But the question was, where do I see the impact of delivery on this? So you're going to hear more about delivery over the course of this conference. I'll say this. My wife, I love her dearly. She works at DoorDash. DoorDash, as I understand it, is profitable in some regions on a per unit basis, but on a total consolidated basis, that business has not yet gotten profitable. Neither has Uber. So I think, in my opinion, there is definite interest from the consumer to have cannabis delivered to them, but not everybody. The majority of transactions today actually take place in store. So, and I think it's roughly, depends on the market, but usually 20 to 30% of a market can be delivery. But then you say, okay, then who should be solving the delivery problem? If there are some consumers that want to be met at their home, someone is not physically able to go to the store, whatever the reason is, you have to meet the consumer where they are. But that's not actually most consumers, numerically speaking. And actually, especially when it comes to loyal and returning customers are like 70% more likely to transact in store than they are in delivery, which that's something that was surprising to us as well. So delivery is here to stay, but I think I have questions as to whether or not it needs to be its own standalone thing. I probably am not surprising anyone that's familiar with the cannabis industry. There have been a number of challenged delivery companies that have tried to solve this problem. In my opinion, it's more likely that you give tools to the retail operator who knows that their customers want delivery, and you need to enable them to be able to do that. But it doesn't necessarily argue for its own stand-up Uber version of cannabis, because mathematically speaking, the numbers aren't really there yet. I think we have a question from the Zoom.
It says the graph looks like you are comparing subscription cost of other platforms to product spend. Shouldn't this show cannabis product spend against, say, something like Amazon product spend? It seems like apples to oranges.
So we're fair, and the purpose here is to talk about the subscription part of this behavior. So Amazon depends on the person, how much they actually spend. We're not putting grocery store up here, right? Actually, grocery is most likely the largest share of spend of a consumer. But I can tell you that these returning cannabis consumers, the cannabis subscriber, they're spending $200 to $400 a month on cannabis. That is a crazy, crazy number if you think about it. And that's what we were trying to show here. So yes, if you at home think that you spend more money per month on Amazon than you do as a cannabis subscriber does, $200 to $400 a month. That's totally fair. I'm just telling you that $200 to $400 a month is a lot of money for an average consumer. Even if you're a loyal consumer, it's a lot of money to be spending if you think about the consumer's wallet.
Ian, thanks for the perspective. It's really interesting. Can you talk for a minute about going back to the meme, as you put it, sort of the far left and sort of disorganized data. So where you put this relative to other industries in terms of the completing the data feedback loop from the consumer coming back into the supply chain? I know we're early innings or in the warm-ups or whatever, but where do you see that going? Because it seems like that's a key element to really mature the industry. And also the relationship between brands and simply, sort of personalized approaches to certain to product choice, things like that. I'd love to have you zoom out and just chat about.
Yeah, really great questions. So there are two questions there. One is related to the interrelation of brands and like, what does the consumer really want? Let's say, is that a fair?
Yeah, just sort of where that is in your head right now.
Yeah,
it's like it's been a sort of Cambrian explosion of brands, and
yeah,
I'm not sure that's solving for what's the job to be done by the
great question
consumer, and then sort of the state of the state in terms of the data feedback loop running through.
Yeah.
The consumer centricity back to the supply chain.
Yeah. So a couple things. I came from a world of brands and investing in brands, or understanding what that really means. What is a brand in the first place? And economically speaking, it's the ability to charge more than your cost for something. And from a consumer standpoint, it is a way to shorten decisions. So if you're in a grocery store, you got 50 versions of olive oil and you sit there and you're like, I have no idea what kind of olive oil I'm going to buy. It actually can cause more angst in the consumer. And so it's a way to quicken decision making and makes people happy. So the problem in cannabis as it relates to just brands is that brands are in many ways fighting with like both hands tied behind their backs. They are unable, obviously, to use, or maybe not obviously, to use traditional channels, let's say, like Facebook, Google, things like that. And on the other hand, they have a working capital problem in the cannabis industry if you're a brand, which is to say that there is not a deep enough working capital and inventory financing that allows for cash flow generation that you would normally expect in a brand. So the brands, while I love them dearly and do expect brands to matter over time, I'm here to tell you that most cannabis consumers, and especially the cannabis subscribers, are actually what we call brand promiscuous. They think they buy more based on category, which is to say that if I walk into a dispensary and my favorite brand is not there, I'm already in the dispensary. I'm not gonna walk out the door and just not buy cannabis. I'm just going to satisfy myself with whatever's there. And that's the behavior that we see much more often. So hopefully that helps you understand like the brand aspect. It is really important that brands, I think, long-term have their chance in this industry. But first, I think the cannabis consumer themselves needs to have a better understanding of what they want, and frankly, cheaper prices too. This is another really important thing. When prices are really high, in my opinion, the consumer is more focused on price because prices are high. So they're like, I have $20. I want the highest potency. I don't care about the brand. I'm literally, this is my money. Give me my cannabis. I'm done, right? When this industry learns how to operate at a lower cost structure or a lower price point, then you're going to see the consumer start to have more preference, because they don't have to just solve for price, potency. And the third element of that is convenience, which is also to say that, again, the cannabis subscriber we're talking about has much more loyalty to a dispensary than they do to a brand. That I also believe is because your average cannabis consumer it's not like you drive across the city or wherever you live to the grocery store. You probably go to the one close to you. And so there's this location or convenience aspect to this that it seems like most cannabis consumers are making decisions based on that price and potency than they are in brand today. But again, that doesn't mean it will always be that way. It just has, we're not ready for it yet. And we're out of time. Okay. Thank you very much.